While most people chase the same freeze-dried meals and overpriced survival kits, I focused on foods that almost everyone else ignores. Here's what's interesting. During the last 4 supply chain disruptions in my area, these 10 foods stayed on the shelves while the must-have prepper staples disappeared almost instantly. Number 5 is sitting in your local grocery store right now for under $3, and it outperforms many $90 emergency kits nutritionally. I saw it happen during the early 2020 panic. Rice was gone before noon. Canned vegetables disappeared hours later. Meanwhile, the foods I'm about to share stayed available long after the rush. So let's get started. Duck fat. It's not something most people even think about, and that's precisely why it's such a smart addition. Almost no one considers it, which means it flies completely under the radar. From a survival standpoint, it's basically concentrated fuel. One single tablespoon packs around 120 calories. In an emergency, when stress is high and you're physically exerting yourself more than usual, your body chews through energy at a much faster rate. That's when dense, high-calorie fats stop being optional and start becoming essential. What really sets duck fat apart for preparedness, though, is its staying power. When it's stored correctly, it isn't just good for a couple of months, it can last for years. I'm not exaggerating. I've got jars in my own supply that are 3 years old and still in excellent condition. Compare that to most vegetable oils, which tend to oxidize and turn rancid relatively quickly. Properly stored animal fats are surprisingly resilient, especially if you keep them in a cool, dark environment, away from light and heat. Here's how I handle mine. You can usually find duck fat in jars at specialty grocery stores or order it online without much trouble. Once I bring it home, I portion it into smaller glass containers with tight sealing lids. Then I stash those jars in the coldest part of my storage space. They don't take up much room at all, and a little goes a long way when you're cooking. From a practical perspective, it's compact, calorie-dense, and incredibly versatile. Now, let me point you toward food item number 2. It's sitting quietly in the baking aisle of your local grocery store, and I'd bet that about 95% of preppers walk right past it without giving it a second glance. Cream of tartar. That plain white powder most people pull out once a year for a specific holiday recipe? It's actually a seriously underrated survival asset. Here's what makes it so valuable. Cream of tartar is a natural acid, and its usefulness stretches far beyond baking cookies. For example, you can combine it with baking soda to create a leavening reaction. In practical terms, that means you can get bread to rise without relying on yeast. In a long-term emergency, especially one where commercial yeast is nowhere to be found, that's a game changer. But the real advantage isn't just versatility, it's longevity. When stored in a sealed, moisture-free container, cream of tartar basically lasts forever. I have containers in my own supply that are 5 years old, and there's been absolutely no drop in quality. Compare that to yeast, which starts losing effectiveness within a few months, even if you keep it refrigerated. From a preparedness standpoint, that difference matters. I fully realized how useful this stuff was about 2 years ago during a prolonged power outage. I was outside cooking biscuits on a camp stove when it hit me. I could mimic buttermilk by adding cream of tartar to regular milk. That simple adjustment meant I could still make light, fluffy biscuits, pancakes, and quick breads without needing specialty or refrigerated ingredients on hand. The science behind it is straightforward but powerful. If you mix half a teaspoon of cream of tartar with half a teaspoon of baking soda, you've just created baking powder on demand. That's a shelf-stable chemical leavening agent you can produce anytime you need it. As for storage, here's what I recommend. Pick it up in bulk from a restaurant supply store or order it online. A 1-pound container runs around $15 and can support years of routine baking. Once you get it home, move it into an airtight container and keep it somewhere dry. As long as moisture stays out, it doesn't spoil. Personally, I keep 3 pounds in my reserves, and I don't worry about it at all. Food item number 3 might sound strange at first, but stick with me. I'm talking about gelatin powder, and not the brightly colored, sugar-loaded Jell-O packets. I mean plain, unflavored gelatin. This is easily one of the most ignored foods in the prepping world, and overlooking it is a serious mistake. Here's why it deserves a spot in your supplies. Unflavored gelatin is almost pure protein, delivering roughly 6 grams per tablespoon. When you're relying heavily on shelf-stable foods and your protein options are limited, having a no refrigeration required protein source is incredibly valuable. That alone makes it worth considering. But gelatin isn't just any type of protein. It's rich in specific amino acids that play a role in supporting joint function, maintaining gut lining health, and preserving skin integrity. In a high-stress scenario, especially one where you're suddenly doing physically demanding work your body isn't used to, joint support becomes more than a comfort issue. It becomes essential. I first started taking gelatin seriously after hearing from someone who survived the siege of Sarajevo. He explained that one of the biggest challenges wasn't just food scarcity, it was the lack of nutritional diversity. Over time, even small deficiencies compounded into significant health problems. Minor gaps in diet slowly turned into major physical issues after weeks and months of strain. Gelatin, in a simple and affordable way, can help bridge some of those gaps. As for storage, it's impressively durable. Keep it sealed and dry, and gelatin powder can last 3 to 5 years without issue. I've personally used containers that were 4 years old and still perfectly fine. From a cost perspective, it's also efficient. A pound runs about $12 and yields dozens of servings, making it an inexpensive way to add meaningful protein support to a long-term food plan. Food number 4 is tucked away in the international aisle, and I'd wager most preppers have walked past it dozens of times without a second glance. I'm talking about dried chickpeas. But here's the part that really matters. You don't want the overpriced little bags from a typical supermarket. The smart move is buying them in bulk from Middle Eastern or Indian grocery stores, where turnover is high and prices are far better. Now let me explain why this is such a big deal. Properly stored dried chickpeas can last anywhere from 20 to 30 years while still retaining their nutritional value, not just remaining technically edible, but actually sustaining. Try finding another protein source with that kind of shelf life for under $2 a pound. It's almost unheard of. What really makes chickpeas shine is how adaptable they are. You can simmer them whole and serve them as a protein-packed side. Blend them into hummus if you've got tahini and lemon juice. Roast them with spices for a crunchy snack. Grind them into chickpea flour and use that for flatbreads, batters, or savory pancakes. You can even sprout them to grow fresh greens when produce isn't available. The flexibility is hard to beat. Last winter, I put this to the test in a very practical way. I ran a 45-day experiment where my family and I ate exclusively from our stored food supply. Dried chickpeas quickly became one of our core staples. We rotated through chickpea curry, roasted chickpeas for snacking, savory chickpea flour pancakes, and tossed whole chickpeas into soups to boost both texture and protein. Not once did my family complain, because the variety kept meals from feeling repetitive. From a nutritional perspective, they're incredibly dense. 1 cup delivers around 15 grams of protein, along with substantial fiber, iron, and folate. When your diet is limited during a crisis, that kind of nutrient concentration becomes critical for maintaining strength and overall health. Storage isn't complicated, but it does need to be done correctly. Use food-grade buckets with airtight lids. Fill them with dried chickpeas, add oxygen absorbers, seal everything tightly, and keep the containers in a cool, dry place. Stored that way, those chickpeas could easily still be viable decades from now, potentially even for the next generation. Personally, I keep about 75 pounds in deep storage. My total cost was roughly $120. That translates to thousands of servings of high-quality protein for less than what many families spend on just a few weeks of regular groceries. Food number 5 sounds so simple that most people completely miss the deeper strategy behind it. I'm talking about vinegar, but not just a single jug of the plain white stuff. The real move is stocking multiple varieties, each with a specific purpose. A lot of preppers grab 1 gallon of white vinegar and assume they've checked the box. In a prolonged emergency, that limited approach can seriously backfire. Different vinegars serve entirely different roles. White vinegar is great for cleaning and basic food preservation. Apple cider vinegar works well in cooking and has traditional health uses. Balsamic adds depth and flavor. Red wine vinegar brings brightness to savory dishes. Rice vinegar is ideal for lighter, Asian-style meals. That range of options matters more than people think, especially when your food choices are restricted. A conversation I had a while back really shifted my perspective. I spoke with a woman who grew up in rural Appalachia during the Great Depression. She told me her family lived on extremely basic staples, but her grandmother always kept several kinds of vinegar on hand. She used them to pickle vegetables, preserve eggs, whip up homemade dressings, and even as folk remedies for minor health issues. That stuck with me. From a preparedness standpoint, vinegar is incredibly dependable. It has an almost indefinite shelf life. I've got bottles in storage that are 6 years old and they're no different than the day I bought them. The acidity makes spoilage virtually impossible under normal storage conditions. Here's where it gets really smart, though. Vinegar is a preservation tool. If you're growing food, trading with neighbors, or foraging, you can pickle fresh vegetables and extend their usable life by months. In a long-term scenario, being able to preserve perishable food without refrigeration becomes a major advantage. In my own setup, I keep about 30 gallons total, divided by function. 10 gallons of white vinegar for cleaning and general preservation. 10 gallons of apple cider vinegar for cooking and wellness uses. 5 gallons of red wine vinegar for flavor. And 5 gallons of rice vinegar for more delicate dishes. Altogether, I spend around $90. For most households, that's essentially a lifetime supply. Storage couldn't be easier. Vinegar already comes in containers that are well suited for long-term keeping. I simply store the bottles in a cool, dark cabinet and leave them alone. No rotation schedule, no special prep. They'll likely outlast most other items in my pantry. And think about the practical versatility. You can clean surfaces without harsh chemicals. You can preserve food safely. You can tenderize tougher cuts of meat with a marinade. In some situations, you can even add it to questionable water sources as an extra layer of precaution. It can also serve as a mild antiseptic for basic first aid needs. There's also a psychological component people underestimate. When you're eating repetitive, simple meals day after day, having the ability to create sauces, dressings, and pickled sides makes a huge difference. Flavor variety boosts morale, and morale matters in a crisis. I've noticed something interesting during shortages too. Plain white vinegar tends to disappear fairly quickly because people associate it with cleaning. But specialty options like balsamic, red wine vinegar, and rice vinegar often sit untouched for weeks. Most shoppers don't view them as essential. That's exactly why they belong in a well-planned, under-the-radar stockpile. Food number 6 is another item people assume they've figured out, but they're overlooking the most important part. I'm talking about dried mushrooms. And the key isn't just having some. It's building variety and buying in bulk. A lot of preppers either ignore mushrooms altogether or toss a single small bag into their cart and call it good. That barely scratches the surface of their potential. There's a whole range to choose from: shiitake, porcini, wood ear, oyster, each one bringing its own texture, flavor profile, and best use scenarios in the kitchen. That diversity isn't just culinary flair. It actually matters for morale. When you're eating from storage long-term, subtle differences in taste and texture can make repetitive meals feel new again. Nutritionally, dried mushrooms punch far above their weight. They're packed with B vitamins, contain vitamin D, and offer minerals like selenium and potassium. But the real secret weapon is umami, that deep, savory richness that gives food a meaty satisfaction. In a situation where fresh meat is limited or unavailable, mushrooms can replicate that hearty depth of flavor and help prevent what I call flavor fatigue. Stored properly, in airtight containers, kept away from moisture and direct light, dried mushrooms can last anywhere from 5 to 10 years. I've personally used 4-year-old batches that still had strong aroma and excellent taste. Rehydrating them is simple. Pour hot water over them and let them sit for about 20 minutes. That's it. And here's a pro tip. Don't discard the soaking liquid. That broth is loaded with flavor and works beautifully as a base for soups, gravies, or sauces. I really grasped how powerful they are during a 2-week camping trip where I relied heavily on my stored foods. I added dried mushrooms to rice dishes, noodles, and simple soups. Even though most meals were plant-based, they felt hearty and satisfying. The takeaway was obvious. Mushrooms amplify basic ingredients. They turn something plain into something substantial. In my own storage, I keep around 10 pounds total, spread across different varieties. It ran me about $130, which breaks down to years' worth of flavor enhancement for hundreds of meals. Storage is straightforward. I transfer them out of their original packaging into mason jars or mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, then keep everything in a cool, dark place. Another overlooked advantage? Space efficiency. 1 pound of dried mushrooms rehydrates to roughly 8 pounds of fresh mushrooms. That's an enormous return in both volume and flavor from a very compact package. During the last major shortage, I made a point to check availability. Mainstream grocery stores were wiped out of fresh and canned mushrooms, but the Asian market still had shelves fully stocked with dried varieties. Most shoppers simply didn't know what to do with them. And that knowledge gap? That's exactly where your edge comes from. Food number 7 might get a few chuckles, but I'm dead serious about this one. Miso paste. Most people hear miso and immediately think of a simple bowl of Japanese soup, but this fermented soybean paste is far more powerful than it gets credit for. From a preparedness standpoint, it's one of the smartest additions you can make. Here's why. Miso is a living fermented food packed with beneficial bacteria. Those probiotics actively support digestion and gut health. In a high-stress scenario where diets suddenly change, fresh produce is limited, and people are eating more shelf-stable foods than usual, digestive health becomes incredibly important. When your gut is off, everything feels harder. What makes miso especially impressive is its shelf life. Stored in the refrigerator, it can last for years. Even without refrigeration, it holds up for months thanks to its salt content and fermentation process, which naturally inhibit spoilage. I've personally used containers that were 3 years old, and not only were they still good, the flavor had actually deepened and improved over time. From a cost perspective, it's efficient. For about $7, you can get a container that yields dozens of servings. That's remarkable value for a fermented food that delivers both flavor and live cultures. And the versatility goes way beyond soup. Yes, you can make traditional miso soup, which is warm, nourishing, and comforting. But you can also stir a spoonful into sauces, whisk it into salad dressings, blend it into marinades, or mix it into grains and vegetables for instant depth. I've even added it to scrambled eggs and spread it thinly on toast. During a month-long challenge where I relied heavily on my stockpile, I used miso constantly. Miso glazed vegetables, miso soup with dried seaweed, miso marinades for fish, even simple miso spreads. Every variation worked, and my family appreciated the change in flavor profiles. Nutritionally, miso contributes plant-based protein, B vitamins, and trace minerals. But the probiotic component is what really sets it apart. Supporting gut health during prolonged stress can have a direct impact on immunity and overall resilience. In my own rotation, I keep 8 containers. 4 stay in the refrigerator for everyday use, and 4 sit in deeper storage. Altogether, that's about $55 invested in years of flavor enhancement and digestive support. Storage couldn't be simpler. Miso is sold in sealed tubs that are already suitable for long-term keeping. If you can refrigerate it, great. It will last even longer. But even at room temperature, it remains stable for months because of its high salt concentration. There's also a morale factor that shouldn't be ignored. A cup of warm, savory miso soup can be incredibly calming. In tense situations, something hot and familiar to sip on can steady nerves and boost spirits in a very real way. During the last round of shortages, I made a point of checking specialty markets. At several Asian grocery stores, shelves were still fully stocked with multiple varieties of miso. Meanwhile, mainstream supermarkets had completely sold out of conventional soup bases. That contrast tells you everything. The items most people overlook are often the ones that remain available, and that's the advantage you want. Food number 8 is one of those items that flies so far under the radar that most preppers don't even recognize the name, and that's exactly what makes it powerful. I'm talking about nutritional yeast. Not the active yeast you bake bread with, but deactivated yeast grown specifically for its nutrient profile. Here's why it deserves your attention. Nutritional yeast is packed with B vitamins, and many varieties are fortified with B12, a nutrient that's extremely difficult to obtain from plant-based sources alone. In a long-term emergency where fresh meat is scarce or rationed, B vitamin deficiencies can become a legitimate problem. Nutritional yeast fills that gap in a simple, shelf-stable way. But nutrition is only half the story. The flavor is what really wins people over. It has a naturally cheesy, slightly nutty taste that makes it incredibly versatile. You can blend it into sauces to mimic cheese without using any dairy. You can sprinkle it over popcorn, pasta, rice, or vegetables to instantly upgrade bland staples. When you're living off stored grains and legumes, that extra layer of flavor can make a huge difference. I stumbled onto nutritional yeast about 3 years ago while experimenting with long-term pantry items. I grabbed a container on impulse, dusted some over freshly made popcorn, and immediately understood the hype. It tasted fantastic, and knowing it delivered a dose of B vitamins made it feel even more worthwhile. Shelf life is solid too. When stored in an airtight container away from heat and humidity, nutritional yeast will easily last 2 to 3 years. I've personally kept containers for over 2 years without any noticeable loss in flavor or quality. Now think about this in a grid-down scenario. If refrigeration is unavailable and dairy products are off the table, being able to whip up creamy cheese-style sauces becomes surprisingly valuable. With nutritional yeast, shelf-stable milk alternatives, and basic seasonings, you can create mac and cheese-style sauces, Alfredo-inspired toppings, or even a simple cheese dip. That's a serious morale boost when meals start feeling repetitive. In my own supply, I store about 6 pounds in sealed containers with oxygen absorbers. The total investment was roughly $70. In return, I've secured years' worth of B vitamins and a reliable way to add comforting flavor to basic foods. And don't underestimate the psychological side. Cheese is comfort food for a lot of people. Recreating that familiar taste when real cheese isn't available helps maintain a sense of normalcy. I've tested this on camping trips with my family, and they genuinely couldn't believe the cheese sauce I made didn't contain any actual cheese. During shortages, I've intentionally checked health food stores to see what stays behind. While spices and flavor enhancers disappear quickly, nutritional yeast often remains untouched. Most shoppers simply don't know what it is or how to use it. And once again, that knowledge gap becomes your advantage. Food number 9 is a throwback, and somehow modern preppers have let it slip off their radar. I'm talking about canned sardines. Not tuna, not salmon. Sardines. These small, oil-packed fish might not look impressive, but nutritionally, they're absolute heavyweights. Here's why they make so much sense in a survival setup. Sardines are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, high-quality protein, calcium, and vitamin D. One modest can delivers more than 20 grams of protein, along with healthy fats that support brain performance and help regulate inflammation. When you're under stress and relying on stored food, those nutrients aren't optional, they're critical. What really makes sardines prepper-friendly, though, is their durability. Properly stored canned sardines typically last 3 to 5 years, and many people report they're still perfectly fine well beyond that window. Unlike fresh fish, which spoils quickly without refrigeration, sardines are completely shelf-stable. No freezer, no fridge, no special handling. They're also cost-effective. You can usually find good quality sardines for $2 to $3 per can. When you break it down by grams of protein, that's cheaper than almost any other animal-based option. In my own stockpile, I keep around 120 cans. The total investment was roughly $250, and that translates into months of dependable protein and omega-3 intake for my family. I don't just stash them and forget about them. I rotate them into everyday meals. We'll have sardines on crackers, toss them into pasta, add them to salads, or mash them into sandwich spreads. By eating them regularly, I keep the supply fresh and make sure no one in the house is surprised by the flavor if we ever have to rely on them heavily. Here's another detail that often gets overlooked. Sardines contain soft, edible bones. That means you're getting a highly absorbable source of calcium. In a situation where fresh dairy isn't available, that built-in calcium source becomes extremely valuable. Storage couldn't be simpler. Keep the cans in a cool, dry place and practice regular rotation. Interestingly, many people find the flavor actually improves slightly over time as the oils blend and mellow. There's also a strategic edge here. During shortages, tuna is usually the first canned fish to disappear. It's familiar, safe, and widely used, so it vanishes fast. Sardines, on the other hand, tend to linger on shelves because a lot of shoppers either aren't used to them or feel intimidated by the idea. I've watched this play out firsthand. In the last buying panic, tuna was wiped out within hours. Sardines were still sitting there days later, giving me plenty of time to stock up calmly while everyone else scrambled for the obvious choice. Food number 10 is the cornerstone that serious long-term planners understand deeply, but rarely talk about openly. I'm referring to wheat berries, not flour, not bread. The actual whole, unprocessed wheat kernels before they're ever milled. Here's why wheat berries are in a league of their own. When sealed in food-grade buckets with oxygen absorbers and stored properly, they can remain viable for 25 to 30 years. And I'm not just saying they'll still be edible. I mean, they'll retain their nutritional integrity and even maintain the ability to sprout. Try finding another staple with that kind of lifespan for under $1 per pound. The flexibility is unmatched. Grind them fresh into flour and you'll get bread that tastes dramatically better than anything made with store-bought, pre-milled flour. You can simmer the whole kernels and use them like a hearty, nutty grain similar to rice. Sprout them for fresh greens rich in vitamins. If necessary, you can even plant them and grow more food. That's not just storage, that's resilience. I first grasped the true value of wheat berries after talking with an older gentleman who had lived through the Great Depression. He told me his family relied heavily on wheat they stored in barrels. They milled it fresh each day, baked bread regularly, and never faced true scarcity because they had prepared in advance. Let's talk numbers. A 50-pound bag typically costs around $40. That's more than 80,000 calories sitting in storage for less than what many families spend on a single dinner out. It's hard to find another prep item that offers that kind of calorie-to-cost ratio. Storage is simple but must be done correctly. Use food-grade buckets with gamma seal lids. Fill them with wheat berries, add about 2,000 cubic centimeters of oxygen absorbers per 5-gallon bucket, seal them tightly, and store everything in a cool, dry space. Treated that way, those grains could still be usable decades from now. In my own deep storage, and here's a crucial detail, freshly milled flour is nutritionally superior to most commercial flour. Once grain is ground, the natural oils begin to oxidize and nutrient levels slowly decline. Grinding it yourself means you're consuming the grain at its peak nutritional value. I watched something telling during the last major shortage. Flour disappeared almost instantly. Bread shelves were empty, pasta was wiped out, yet bulk bins of wheat berries at health food stores and local co-ops remained largely untouched. Most shoppers didn't recognize them or didn't know how to use them. The few who understood quietly filled their buckets while others stood staring at empty flour aisles. Now let's be honest. I've just walked you through 10 foods that most preppers will never seriously consider because they're too busy following mainstream advice. These options are cheaper, store longer, and, most importantly, tend to remain available when panic buying clears out the obvious choices. I haven't just read about these items. I've tested every single one during real-world situations, power outages, storms, and extended pantry-only challenges. This isn't theory, it's experience. If you found this helpful, hit the like button so more people can see it. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 10 foods caught you off guard. And be honest, how many were already in your storage? My guess is most people had one or two at best.